Welcome, welcome. Let's see. I am looking at the time and it looks like we are right at the top of the hour, and this is a jam-packed webinar. And so I am going to begin. I can see that I have some chats coming through, social media trying to join in. So I'm sure some folks will join us in a bit late. But for those of you who are here now, thank you for joining us today. This is my absolute favorite topic to talk about, and it's just so relevant these days with everything going on in the world. It seems that you are more of a rare breed if the heaviness is not weighing down on you, and we all just feel a little bit like the lady in the picture sometimes. So, the missing link, the key to escaping fear and worry naturally that no one is talking about. I am Dr. Andrea, and I am so thrilled that you have joined us today. A little bit of house cleaning. This webinar is roughly an hour long. So I encourage you to stay all the way till the end. If you have any questions during the process, feel free to type them in the chat. I'm going to try to moderate that at the same time I'm doing the webinar. So if I miss it, I will certainly email you back with answers. And every single Monday at 1, I host office hours live through our Facebook page that can be found at facebook.com/treehouseliving. So you could join us every Monday for various topics. I also have a group that I moderate that is called Empowered Parents Now. And you could find us on Facebook and ask all your questions there. I'm very active in that group because I really like connecting with fellow mamas like me. So on that note, I hope you join us in those places, and let's get started. So this is the standard disclaimer. This is an educational webinar. Please don't make changes in your healthcare routine without first talking to your holistic healthcare practitioner, because I'm on this side of the screen and you're on your side of the screen, and I'm a researcher and advocate for natural health, but I am not your individual provider. So please take your health seriously. Use all of this wonderful research that I'm about to share with you to optimize your health, but do it under the discretion of a certified holistic practitioner. So I love these videos. I love to start this off because somewhere in our collective history of when we decided to be a mom at that point, I think somewhere in us, we all had this joy in our mind, right? Like, look at this mom bouncing on the ball. She is so in the moment. She is so loving everything about this. And what she's not doing is yelling at her kids. What she's not doing, this happy woman sliding down the slide, is worrying about what would happen if she dropped her child at the bottom and they got hurt. And then they had to go to the emergency room and COVID's going on, and then what would her husband think? And all of this heaviness we place on us. I call this peace of mind parenting. Peace of mind parenting is this notion that you are full in mind, body, and spirit. You can parent authentically and in harmony with everything going around you without feeling weighted down with the heaviness of the world. Many of you might be tuning in right now after, gosh, I don't know how many different conversations about natural ways to treat anxiety. Before I started this webinar, when I was just promoting it, I got a lot of emails saying, well, what are you going to say that's different? What do I not know? And the truth of the matter is, a lot of different things out there didn't work for a lot of different reasons, but many of times they weren't designed to work, right? Sometimes there's a lot of approaches. If you've ever felt like you did an approach to health that was that had no exit strategy, that's what I call it, right? There's no exit strategy attached, maybe taking a pill for the rest of your life. That's not really helping you find that missing link and get over all of your anxiety. That's simply hiding the symptom. If you ever felt like that's not really achieving what you want to achieve, this peace of mind parenting, well, you're probably right. And some of you might be listening feeling really frustrated. Even as I say that, you feel frustrated because you've been down these roads before. You've tried this before and it didn't work. Well, let me tell you something, and this is a really important point of this webinar. The problem that you've experienced with natural approaches to anxiety, well, the problem doesn't lie with you. It's not your broken brain. It's not that they don't fit with you. It's that most of the time, what people are promoting are symptom chasing solutions. They're not systems of support. So what we're going to talk about today is how to find that missing link and how to develop a system of support that captures everything you need holistically so you could achieve this type of peace of mind parenting. So you can bounce on that ball with your child without yelling at them that they might get hurt, without yelling at them that they're late for dinner or their shoes are dirty or everything is way too overwhelming for you. And so that you could achieve this type of peace of mind parenting, something that you cannot take a pill to replace. Because the truth is we can't ever supplement or take a pill that will replace mind, body, and spirit. And so that is what we're going to talk about today. That is what we're really achieving. We're not just trying to hide anxiety. We are fighting our way to peace of mind parenting. So my goal for today's webinar is to communicate to you, to argue this point that your brain is not broken. You might have heard that before. Heck, you might have felt that way before. But it's not your brain that's broken, it's actually our healthcare system that's broken. And your pathway to peace of mind parenting is not in your brain, it's actually in your gut. And I'll explain more about what that means. But the answer to overcoming your anxiety is none of that stuff you tried in the past, but it actually lies in your gut and this holistic approach that I'll describe in a bit. So I am Dr. Andrea. Ooh, I used to have a picture here. It doesn't show up, but that's okay, because you see me right here instead. I'm Dr. Andrea. I am a research psychologist. I focus on changing healthcare systems. My background is in serious and violent youth offenders, which surprises people often when I say that, but I worked intensively with the hardest of the hard families and kids. And I realized at that point in time that clinical work wasn't enough, that if we really want to get to the root cause of why so many children and so many parents and so many families were suffering, we needed to not just go to individual therapy, but we needed to be broader. We needed to learn more. We needed to understand how we could change our system to support health, not just chase disease. And that is what I do these days. My husband, Dr. Eric, he's a chiropractor and a functional medicine practitioner. We have developed a system called the Gut Happy Lifestyle, which we write about in our #1 international best-selling book, When Food Hurts, which you see on the screen. And we have a whole bunch of resources for parenting. We are committed to spreading the word about how families could live happy, healthy, holistic lives. And we support them in a whole bunch of different ways. So you are not here to learn all about me, and actually talking about myself is my least favorite part of this webinar. So I will move right on, but if anyone wants to meet me more, please join our Facebook group because I share all of my daily life stories over there. This is my why. So all of that was the fancy, jarble, but this is why I do what I do. These are my 3 little boys and my husband, Dr. Eric. And if you are a boy mom, right on, because I am a boy mom in all shapes of the word term. These are my 3 little boys, and every day I wake up trying to make this world a better place for them because, gosh, there's a lot of, ever walk into the nurse's office these days? I remember walking into the nurse's office when my oldest was in kindergarten and looking at that back wall, and the whole wall is filled with medications and anti-anxiety, EpiPens and anti-seizure medicines and so many medications. Our kids are sick, our world is sick, our system needs to change. And so I wake up every single morning just trying to make wellness a norm for my kids because, I don't know, people have told me I'm crazy that I can't change the world, but I'm sure as heck not going to stop trying because those 3 little boys and your kids at home deserve every moment of it. Now, many times, if you know me, I share my story about gut health. I wrote a book on gut health because I have a very personal connection with it, but that is not the story I'm going to share with you today. This is actually, even though he looks very similar to the little kids on the last screen, that's not my son. This is a picture of my brother, and my brother is 8 years younger than me. And growing up, he suffered from extraordinary anxiety. And if you suffer from debilitating anxiety or have a family member that suffers from debilitating anxiety, you know that anxiety is a family dysfunction, that it affects every single person in the family. It is not just an individual thing, it is a family thing. And in fact, it was my behavior, specifically going away to college, that triggered my brother. And it's what set off, that was the environmental trigger that set off his trajectory. And my mom at the time did everything in her power, because this was before we were a holistic family, and my mom did everything in her power to try to help my brother naturally. She did not want to put my brother on medications as a child. She had read the side effects. She did all this stuff, and she was like, not gonna happen. And this quote on the screen is one of the worst bits of advice I have ever heard, and I am so grateful for my mother for not listening to it. But at one point, the school system, as this child was unable to attend elementary school because of this debilitating fear, said, you just need to show him tough love. And my mom looked at them and said, there is absolutely no way I'm going to shove my son on a school bus in a panic attack when social relationships are starting to bud, when self-confidence is starting to bud. There ain't no way I'm doing that. And indeed, I think that's one of the coolest stories I could ever tell about my mom, because if we are not advocates for our children, then I don't know who's going to be. Now, the story turns out that she did find her way in a psychiatrist's office after going through all of the routes and not knowing what to do and not knowing where to turn. And this psychiatrist also gave her a snippet of information which lies in her heart forever. And he said to her, you know you're holding your son back by not medicating him. And it was at that point she said, I guess write the prescription. Because she had such immense mom guilt that this was all of her fault. Now, if you have anxiety yourself, and you have how I did not start this webinar was talking about the impacts of maternal anxiety on children, right? I didn't start there. Because we all have enough mom guilt. We all know, whether it's our children suffering from anxiety or our own anxiety, we all feel enough blame. We all feel guilty enough. We don't need anybody else reminding us of that. But in this case, that psychiatrist did. In fact, he used it as leverage to prescribe the medication, and my mom put my brother on it, and it changed my brother. I'm sharing this story to tell you that for the rest of this webinar, I am going to talk about natural approaches of anxiety. In fact, I'm going to start off by talking about the risks of medications and how medications came about and why we even use medications, what they're doing. However, I want you to know, if you are currently medicated, if you've ever taken a medication in the past, I am not judging you. Medications were the thing that at least got my brother from here to there. Were they the thing that healed him? He is now an adult, living on his own, hasn't had one pill in probably 25 years. But it was a Band-Aid for a very short period of time. Now, what happened with my mom and what happened with my brother is she learned about holistic health. She read that insert in that medication, and he was only on it for a very short period of time before she said, this is not going to be my family, this is not going to be my child. And she committed to an holistic approach, which I will share with you today. Of course, back then we didn't have the names for these things, but we do now, and we have the science now, so I could share it now. And it worked, and he's been anxiety-free his whole life. But I do not judge you if you are on medication, if your family's on medication, if a friend is on medication. I do not judge any of that, because we make decisions at the point in time we make decisions for. And this is a point in time where you can make a new decision or the same decision. And I, again, encourage you to make all decisions with the guidance of your individualized health care provider, preferably a holistic provider. Okay, so this is educational, non-judgmental, and in a place of love, because I've been there. I know what it's like to live with anxiety and with people who have anxiety. It is not fun. It is hard. And we all just want to live in harmony with all of those feelings, and that's what we're going to talk about today. We are conditioned in this society to believe that we need a prescription in order to feel happy. That the only answer to our problem is written on that prescription pad, that our brain is broken, that we have a chemical imbalance of the brain. How many of you have ever heard you have a chemical imbalance in your brain and that's the problem with anxiety? Maybe you feel like these other natural approaches don't work for you because your brain is imbalanced, because you have some chemical imbalance, because you have an anxiety disorder. And that means there's something in your brain. I'm here to tell you that that is not the case. You do not need a prescription to feel good, right? You cannot take a pill that replaces mind, body, and spirit. And I'm going to share with you with that today. Now, what I'm going to share with you today did not just work for me and my family. This worked for people we have worked with as Dr. Eric, my husband, sees functional medicine patients. And this was somebody that went on our gut health protocol. This was specifically for many different reasons, but this was what she mentioned afterwards. She said, before I tackled my gut health, I was anxious. I had fatigue. I had a foggy brain. This was somebody who couldn't work every day because her brain was so foggy. After working with Drs. Nazarenko for 2 months, I noticed a huge clarity in my mental clarity, huge difference in my mental clarity. I had more energy. And most importantly, I've noticed a stabilization of my anxiety. So she was up and down and up and down and up and down. And now she was stable after treating her gut. So this is what we're going to talk about today. This is the solution that could last you a lifetime, not just while you're doing it. So the one thing, if you walk away from this webinar with one big message, it's this: your brain is not broken. And just because medication may work doesn't mean it's addressing the problem. So there's a difference between a cause and a solution. There's a difference between a problem and a treatment. A medication is a treatment. It is an attempted solution to the problem, being the symptoms of anxiety. Okay? But we're going to talk about today how those map on together. So first, before we dive in, this is an important theoretical frame. When I first learned, this is a schematic that I first learned my very first day when I started learning about psychopathology in grad school. And these are all, there's many more of these in fact, but these are the main buckets of theories of why, when you have anxiety, why do you have anxiety? Is it because of some biological cause? Is it because of some Freudian idea from when you were young and some psychosexual conflicts? Is it from learning? Is it from family dysfunction? Is it from the way you're thinking? Is it cultural? These are all different approaches, and depending on your belief system of the cause of the problem, you will come up with a different solution, okay? So the leading one out there, the one that has gained so much attention, and probably not surprisingly because it's the one with the backing of the pharmaceutical industry, is this biological cause. So what does a biological cause mean? It means you are experiencing anxiety because of some biological reason, okay? Some biological reason, meaning anxiety is caused by imbalances in your brain. It is probably not surprising that this biological basis of behavior, this biological basis of anxiety, is really the leading modality that's shared by psychiatrists and medical doctors. Quick aside, there is a difference. If you don't know, some people never thought about it ever. There's a difference between a psychiatrist and a psychologist. A psychiatrist is an MD. Okay, they have the ability to prescribe psychoactive drugs, so drug classes that pass the blood-brain barrier and go into the brain. Not all drugs that address mental disorders can be prescribed by a general MD. So they are a specialist that deals with psychopathology or mental disorders. A psychologist believes more in the environmental causes of mental illness or dysfunction and addresses the environmental piece. So they don't prescribe. I'm a psychologist. We don't prescribe medications. I'm not a practitioner, I'm a researcher. Psychiatrists are MDs. So what is this chemical imbalance of the brain and why are we talking about it? What does it even mean? So the chemical imbalances of the brain, this is a 1-minute overview to neuropsychology. Chemical imbalances of the brain refer to these little tiny synapses, they're called. So within your brain, you have all of these nerves. The nerves in your brain are called neurons. And they all communicate with each other in 2 different ways. One is electrically. So a little electric impulse goes down the neuron and fires when it's firing, and then it shoots out these little tiny chemical neurotransmitters, these little tiny chemical messengers. And these little tiny chemical messengers go from one neuron to the next neuron over this little tiny gap called a synapse. Now, what we see when we see anxiety or depression or any other mental illness is that, and physical illnesses as well, is that there are imbalances. What the imbalance means is you might have too much or too little of certain neurotransmitters. Makes sense, right? There's an imbalance. You have too much or too little, depending on which one it is. And so when we think about a chemical imbalance of the brain, when it comes to anxiety, and the same is true for depression, by the way, but when we think about anxiety, we like to believe that scientists understand exactly which neurotransmitters are involved and where in the brain they're involved, right? We like to say, oh, this little area of my brain or this big area of my brain has too much or too little serotonin or dopamine or norepinephrine or GABA. And those are all neurotransmitters, these little chemical messengers. And if I take this medicine, right, this class of medicine addresses serotonin and this class of medicine addresses GABA, and whichever one's my problem, I take it and it goes there and it addresses it and my problem's fixed. It's kind of like a superficial way we think about this, right? But if you really think about it, that's probably, I know for me, that's what I used to think. But in reality, what we know is that there are so many neurotransmitters involved in anxiety. This is just some of them, right? So you'll see some you recognize perhaps, like GABA, which is often implicated in the inhibition system. Serotonin is implicated in anxiety and depression. Dopamine is in the reward system pathways. But then when you go down further, you might have not really thought about the cannabinoid system being involved in anxiety. But then you remember that you have heard that CBD is good for anxiety, which must mean there's some connection there, or melatonin. A lot of people don't associate melatonin with anxiety, but indeed it's a neurotransmitter in the brain. There are so many neurotransmitters in the brain that connect and relate to anxiety. There is not just one. And the other important point to remember is that these neurotransmitters are not located in just one area of the brain. These are diffuse, right? They are all over the brain. And in fact, they're all over the body. This is going to be an important point as we move forward, because the question is, where did this concept of a broken brain come from? If we have all of those neurotransmitters and the science is still developing about which neurotransmitters are involved in anxiety, well then where did this idea of a broken brain even come from in the first place? And in fact, it's a little bit backwards of a relationship. So remember a couple moments ago when I said we have a problem and then we come up with a solution. We believe there's a broken brain, so we come up with a solution that fixes that exact problem. This area, GABA, I need GABA. Well, in fact, that's not how we came up with it. We didn't start with a theory and come up with a solution. Instead, what happened is we realized that when we did things like put more serotonin in, use drugs to manipulate the levels of serotonin, people felt better. When we manipulated this neurotransmitter, people felt better. So therefore, serotonin must be implicated in anxiety. It's a little bit backwards of a thinking. It's easier to understand when we go a little bit one step further into a hypothetical example, and it's this. Was your headache associated with an NSAID shortage? Of course not. It's a silly example, but it's the same concept. When you take an NSAID, you have a headache, you take an NSAID, the headache goes away. Does it mean your body was imbalanced and needed more NSAIDs? Or did it mean that it just simply worked? The medication worked. It made your headache go away. But the root cause, the actual problem, what didn't it have to do with the NSAID? It had to do with whatever was going on, but the NSAID happened to help it. And the same is true with medications and the way we've approached it. Just because SSRI, a selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor, helped your anxiety doesn't mean the serotonin was necessarily the problem. It just means it helped. And in fact, this becomes really important because look at how many neurotransmitters are involved here. There are so many, and the list is growing. This is just a partial list of what we know, and we still don't know a lot. And these are all over our body, never mind all over our brain. And we have a blood-brain barrier that's protecting it. So you need someone like a psychiatrist with a specialized degree just to prescribe a lot of these drugs because they're so dangerous to get through the blood-brain barrier. And when they get there, it's not like they're the postal service where they know exactly where they're going. Instead, they're just impacting your whole brain. And what happens when things impact their whole brain? Well, you end up with side effects because now you're doing things like you're shooting these benzos into your brain and they're affecting all areas of your brain, not just the areas that you're hoping to affect. So this is an old paper. This is all the way from 1998. But what this is showing is that this class of benzos that was out at the time could lead to these behavioral abnormalities, including psychosis, paranoia, violence, antisocial acts, depression, and suicide. They can impair cognition, especially memory and confusion, because these same neurotransmitters that are implicated in anxiety are implicated in cognition, in memory, in addiction, in behavioral regulation. In fact, I just went on drugs.com, and this, I'm not going to tell you which drug it is because I don't want to be sued, but this is a common drug, very common drug that you all know of. These are the most common and more common or less common. These aren't the rare, okay? These are not the rare. I couldn't fit the rare side effects on the slide, okay? Think about that for a second. These are the ones that are common enough that they were classified as, I think, most or less common, not rare. Some of these are pretty dang serious, right? Seizures, shivering, tightness in the chest, right? Like look at loss of bladder control, loss of coordination, muscle pains, nausea. These are not little deals. And the reason why these exist is because you're pushing, well, there's many reasons. One of which is that you're pushing drugs into your brain and they're affecting all of the areas. Now, there's more to it, and there's more to it than this I could go into today. And why I'm going to emphasize again, this list should prompt a conversation with your individual holistic healthcare provider. Do not do anything without seeking support based on my webinar. But I do want to inform you to look at the inserts, read the side effects, because maybe we got it all wrong. Maybe your brain is not broken. Maybe your anxiety is actually adaptive, and treatment, when it becomes maladaptive, treatment requires a holistic approach to not hide the symptom of anxiety, but rather make it more adaptive. So let's get back to this idea of how anxiety is adaptive. And I want you to imagine for a minute, you're walking down to this beach on this nice pathway, and all of a sudden you see this sign. Now, I don't know about you, but I personally do not like snakes. They are not my jam. And so I'm walking and I see this sign, and now suddenly, you know, my kids are running up ahead because I have 3 boys, right? So they're like probably in the water already. And I'm walking, and now all of a sudden I'm feeling tightness in my chest, right? That's where I feel it. I'm feeling more like, and now I'm yelling at my kids. I'm angry. I'm yelling at them to stick together and stop climbing on the fence. Why are you doing that? Now I'm frustrated. I'm mad. And now I'm feeling guilty at myself for feeling mad at my kids and ruining the vacation that I'm yelling at. Who has a scenario that's like this? Because our behavior came from how we felt, and we felt anxious. But that anxiousness is probably kind of adaptive, because what if a snake actually was there and could kill you, right? When I was pregnant with my 3rd, we went to an alligator park because boy mom, and we went into something I'll never forget. We went into this snake reptile house, and this snake was behind a screen, and he was looking at me, and he had this like red lights on him and these heat lamps. And I swear he was looking at me. I was very attuned to my body and I left. But if I did not leave, I would have had a panic attack. Now, I knew in my brain that this was illogical because the snake was caged. I don't even think it was a venomous snake. I knew this was illogical, but it didn't stop my body from responding. Now, because I understand triggers and what my body was doing, I immediately left. But if I didn't, my whole trajectory could have been different. And this is part of when I work with moms on anxiety, doing a holistic approach. This is part of our thinking, is how do we understand these triggers? But what happens is this feeling you feel, or that feeling I felt before I got angry, oh no, my slide isn't picking up. I wonder why. Well, it's part of what we call a sympathetic response. I'm gonna go back and hope, I don't know why that picture's not picking up. It's part of a sympathetic response. Our nervous system is divided into two branches. One is a sympathetic branch, and that is your fight or flight. So that's what you feel. Your muscles tense, your digestion actually stops because you need to either fight the snake or run out of its way, fight or flight. Your body is saying there is a danger and you need to get out of there. That's what you feel when you imagine this picture. The other side of your nervous system is called a parasympathetic nervous system. This is resting and digesting. There is no threat around, and you could just rest and digest. Your whole digestive system starts acting again. Your reproductive system starts acting again. You are able to rest and digest. You are able to heal and sleep and calm. We are designed to most of the time live in the parasympathetic nervous system. Unfortunately, anxiety lives in the sympathetic response. So I want you to pause for a moment from our thinking of snakes and go to a different part of the world, and let's go to zebras. So have you ever seen a pack of zebra? Are they called a pack? I don't know if they're called a pack. A herd? A group of zebras, a family of zebras. I don't know what they're called. If anyone knows what they're called, let me know in the chat. But some sort of herd of zebra, right? So they're out in the savannah and they're roaming and they're feeling good, right? They're like eating all the grass and doing their zebra thing. Then all of a sudden they see a lion coming by. So this lion comes up and it starts charging. So these zebra who are roaming and resting and digesting and feeling grand in their happy zebra life, all of a sudden go from parasympathetic to sympathetic, and they start running, and they are fight or flight. They're not going to fight the lion, so they're flighting, right? Every single part of their body, they stop eating. They're not stopping to poop, right? They're going. They are getting out of there. Every single part of their body changes because they need to get out of the harm's way. They need to get out of the way of the lion. So imagine what their body feels like. You probably feel that way sometimes when you have to get out of danger, like if there's a snake on a beach. Your body tenses, you've got to go. Well, in the case of the lion was successful, and the lion got one of these zebra. Sad story, I know. What do all the other zebra do? Have you ever seen this on like Animal Planet? Do they keep running? They actually don't. The other zebras stop and they go back to eating almost instantaneously, because even though the lion is there, the lion no longer poses a threat because they know that the lion captured one of their little herd, group, family, whatever they're called, members. He ate them. But because the lion's eating, it's no longer going to be hunting, and so they're safe. And so they immediately go from that fight or flight sympathetic response to their parasympathetic response. They immediately go back. The problem is, in our culture, we are no longer dealing with lions. We are not the zebra who are chasing lions. And the things that are causing us stress and this sympathetic response are things like working moms with virtual learning, right? COVID, momming, life, working, worrying about family, stress. We are living in a state of constant sympathetic activation. We are no longer the zebra who is resting and digesting, then activates their sympathetic response and runs, and then goes back. We activate it from the moment we open our eyes till the moment we go to sleep, and we do not stop. We are living in fight or flight constantly, and social media does not make it better. How many of you try to relax by laying down in bed, grabbing your phone, and going on social media? Social media is like a pit of fight or flight. We rarely feel really rested and digested after engaging on social media, especially in a political year, especially with COVID going on. We are living in a state of sympathetic activation. So that anxiety that used to be adaptive, used to be really adaptive because it could get you out of harm's way from the snake or make you run away from the lion, is no longer adaptive because it never shuts off. You never shut off. So maybe if we want to shut it off, maybe we need to start saying, how do we calm the sympathetic nervous system instead of saying, how do we fix the brain? Because all of that chemical imbalance we saw in the brain earlier, all those neurotransmitters, those can be conceived as the effect of an overactive sympathetic nervous system. Your body's responding to a constant activation of sympathetic response. So now we're going to take a pause and we're going to go over here to the gut. Wah! Andrea, you're making me jump over here to the gut. How does any of this have to do with digestion? And I promise I'll get there, because we're not used to thinking about the role of gut in anxiety. We're just not programmed that way because no one's talking about it that way. But it is kind of intuitive. We use it in our language all the time. In fact, when I took coursework, it was sort of a mastermind in the history of psychology, and we talked about how ancient philosophers used to think about psychology. We learned that they used to think the mind, well, there's a lot of philosophical debate, but the mind used to exist in the body, and the gut was one of the places where they put it. We, for a long time, realized that mental ideas are not distinct from our gut. And when we say things like butterflies in our stomach, well, that's like the feeling of anxiety physiologically, right? We intuitively, this makes sense. We've just been trained to shut it off because the problem's in my brain. We call it mental illness. So what do I mean by the gut? When I talk about the gut, I'm talking about from the time food enters to the time food exits, but I'm specifically focused in the intestinal area because that is where the magic happens when we talk about something called the gut microbiome. In this webinar, I will not have enough time to go in huge amounts of depth about what the microbiome is, but I encourage you to follow me on social media, Facebook at Dr. Andrea PhD, or in our group Empowered Parents. And again, every Monday at 1 on our Facebook page, Treehouse Living. So facebook.com/Treehouse Living. I do open office hours where I talk about another gut health topic every single week. It's free. It's just a live, tune in, ask questions. And, let's talk gut health. But what is the microbiome? The microbiome is a living organ system within us. We used to think that we were like these isolated creatures and these bacteria would come along for the ride. But in fact, we live in symbiosis with all of these bacteria and microorganisms inside of us. We rely on them for survival. So I use this term called microbes in the microbiota. They live, the whole collective ecosystem is called the microbiome. It is made up of trillions of bacteria, viruses, fungi, protozoa, archaea, protists, microscopic animals, parasites. I know I'm forgetting some, but there are so many different living organisms in there. Oftentimes I revert to saying bacteria because that is simply what we've researched the most. But we know that these bacteria, these microbes, there's over 100 trillion of them in a human body. In fact, the number of microbial cells inside of us outweigh our number of human cells 10 to 1, which makes us more microbe than it makes us human. And the amazing, phenomenal, mind-blowing part of this whole thing is not nearly the size of the microbiome, which, by the way, is about 3% of your body weight. That is enough to blow your mind, but it's not simply their size or the fact that it's a whole living ecosystem inside of us, but the fact that we rely on these creatures for survival. Now, pause for a moment. I'm not saying they help us thrive. I'm not saying they help us be healthy. I'm saying our survival is contingent upon these little microbes. We cannot function. We cannot survive as a species if we kill all of our bacteria and viruses and germs. We cannot do it. We rely on our microbiome to survive. In fact, there are certain nutrients that our bodies need to function at the most basic level that our human DNA does not code for. So without these bacteria synthesizing and processing and digesting and metabolizing all of these nutrients, we can't do what our body needs to do because our genetic code does not code for it, because we have co-evolved with our microbiome and these microbes. So this is just a partial list of some of the essential functions that our microbiome is responsible for in our health. Digestion of nutrients, otherwise indigestible, that's what I just covered. They synthesize vitamins. Hey, there's a word, neurotransmitters, which we'll come back to, amino acids and short-chain fatty acids. They're responsible for mineral and ion absorption, cell differentiation and proliferation. That should ding, ding, ding the link to many different types of cancers. They metabolize dietary carcinogens. They metabolize a lot of drugs. There is some research out there about SSRIs in adolescents and the efficacy of them for anxiety. SSRIs are a class of drugs used for anxiety. And in fact, the blood levels differ based on how the microbiome is able to process and break down these drugs. They have a huge role in immune system development, which is a topic I could talk about forever, but I'm just going to move right on because that's not the topic of today's webinar. But the bottom one here is the one that I want to really focus on today, which is behavioral development, which includes mental processes. The role of the microbiome is essential in our brain and body's function. In fact, it is so essential to our body's function that it's called the second brain. So we all recognize that our brain is like the master system here. Like it's the most important thing in how our body functions. If we're brain dead, we're effectively dead, right? I mean, some people could argue otherwise, but I'm not going to get into that philosophical debate. But effectively, you know, like our bodies can't do much if our brain is dead. Well, our second brain is equally as important to our functioning. We cannot differentiate the two. And in fact, they are so tightly related that there is this thing called the gut-brain axis, or sometimes referred to as the microbiome gut-brain axis, which refers to that direct and indirect communication pathways between the brain and the gut. Because our brain actually doesn't really know what to do without the communication from those little microbes, all those little bacteria and bugs living inside of us. They're the things telling the brain, hey, you should respond. And then the brain responds back. And so we like to think of the brain as this master controller system where the brain is in charge, go brain. But in fact, the brain is part of a system that's working alongside the gut. And the more science that rolls out on this, the more complicated we see this relationship being. And don't worry, I'm not going to go deep into this slide, but what I want to show you here in the next couple of slides is that, you know, this is not all woo-woo work over here. You know, a lot of times in holistic healthcare, and when, you know, and when you start off by challenging mainstream thought, people think, that's just an idea. That's just woo-woo stuff. But this is science. And the truth of the matter is there's a 17-year gap between when science agrees on something and when it becomes mainstream. So just because this isn't mainstream thinking yet, doesn't mean it's not based in evidence. And in fact, more and more and more evidence is exploding by the day, showing the link between anxiety and mental processes and the microbiome. And the relationship is complex. So the relationship between how the brain and the gut communicate with each other is through the vagal nerve is a big way. There's hormonal interactions. There's all of these different chemical pathways that communicate through all those little bugs that live in your body and your brain. And if you are looking at the slide and understand some of it, you'll start to notice like GABA's written here, tryptophan's written here. You're going to start to see a lot of these neurotransmitters being passed down, which we'll talk about in a moment. So this is a more simplistic version of that slide, but again, there's this really strong, this is from a different article, but there's these really strong different communication routes that are coming from the gut to the brain. So it's not all top-down processing, it's first brain, second brain processing, and they work together. So remember all of those neurotransmitters we talked about, how you have a chemical imbalance of your brain? Well, what if I told you that 90% of the serotonin in your whole body exists in your gut? And over 30 neurotransmitters that are functioning in your brain, all those chemical imbalances of your brain, well, they're being made in your gut and stored in your gut. Only 10% of the serotonin is in your central nervous system. The rest of it's in your gut. So maybe the problem is actually not a chemical imbalance of your brain, but a microbiome imbalance in your gut. Because that is where the serotonin is coming from, not your brain. So we could pump medicine in your brain and we might see a difference, but maybe instead of doing that with all of those side effects, we could go back in the chain and address where the serotonin is coming from in the first place. Serotonin, I'm using it as an example here. There's actually, oh man, this was my favorite, oh, here we go. This is my favorite slide because this shows you all, I'm not gonna go into the details, but this is an article that synthesized a bunch of different studies where they look at dopamine as the neurotransmitter and the bacterial strains that are associated with the production or synthesis of these different neurotransmitters. And you're going to see a whole bunch of these related to anxiety. So dopamine implicated in anxiety, noradrenaline, acetylcholine, histamine, serotonin, GABA. These are all major anxiety related neurotransmitters, and they are associated with these organisms in your gut. The problem is not your brain. Your brain is not broken, but your gut may be unhealthy. So how does this translate into action? Like, so, okay, so they're made in your gut, but does it really matter, Andrea? Well, yeah, it does. Again, I'm just showing you these overviews of just a splattering of studies so you could just see how this is so incredibly scientifically based and not just my crazy theory out there. One of the ways we indicate if your gut is healthy is based on the bacterial diversity. Diversity is one of these indicators of gut health. Well, what we know is that gut diversity impacts personality traits. And right here, I don't know if you could see my mouse, but right here you'll see anxiety. And what you see is that the gut diversity in people who have anxiety is lower, less diversity. Over here, we like to, we think about the microbiome and stress, right? We can't talk about anxiety and not talk about stress, especially stress in our environment, right? And so we might think, well, I live in a really stressful environment and my environment is so stressful that it's affected my health. My health has decreased because of my environment. But did you also know that your perception of the amount of stress in your environment is because of what your gut looks like in the first place? So this is sometimes easier to understand if you think about two people in the same exact stressful environment. They grew up in the same, two siblings grew up in the same home, same amount of stress, same community stress, school stress, peer stress, family stress, everything's the same, but one handles it perfectly fine and the other one caves. Why? Well, because their perception of stress was different. And one of the reasons their perception of stress was different may be their microbiome, because the microbiome is regulating what we call the HPA axis or the stress axis. This is one of my favorite studies. This one blows my mind. But this came out of the Journal of Clinical Psychiatry, and it showed that antibiotic use actually increased the risk of anxiety, depression. In fact, the risk of having a diagnosed anxiety disorder increased 17% after just one round of penicillin and 44% after 5 rounds is what these researchers found in their study. Why? Because what does an antibiotic do? An antibiotic, a broad spectrum antibiotic, is basically like throwing an atomic bomb on your gut microbiome. Sure, it kills the bad guys, but you know what else it's killing? Many of the good guys, and it's reducing diversity. And reduced diversity leads to increased anxiety. Crazy study. So here's the question, right? This is why you all tuned in. If the anxiety has the root in the gut, can we treat anxiety by treating the gut? And the answer is, also based in science, a resounding yes. Now, do we have a huge amount of research on, all of the possible treatments out there? No, because this is a brand new area of research, right? We are growing. However, they have published recently, last year, a systematic review on treating anxiety symptoms by regulating intestinal microbiota. And what did they find across all these studies? Yeah, it works. And the efficacy rate on average was 86%. That is humongous efficacy rate. I started with these slides with looking at efficacy rates of other approaches, and then I decided to not put them in there to not invite undue criticism by other areas. But I encourage you to look up efficacy rates in other treatments, because you're not going to find an 86% efficacy rate. So how do these studies improve gut health? Well, in this review article where they talk about all of the treatments that are in the scientific literature out there at the time that they reviewed, they lump them into two big groups: probiotic interventions and dietary changes. Probiotic interventions are where they take a particular strain of a probiotic and they give it to people. A lot of this started with mice or animal research, where they get animals without any germs in them, and then they see how the anxiety impacts. I don't have time to go into all that, but what we found are that there are particular probiotics that are beneficial for anxiety, very specific strains. So it's not that all probiotics will work for all things, but there are certain strains that are good for particular things. So we have a probiotic that we sell under our line of Gut Happy that is particularly related to anxiety, especially for the postpartum period. These are specific strains that are validated for that purpose. My issue with a probiotic intervention alone is that it's simply taking the same theory of take a pill, feel better. It's just a more beneficial pill. And I don't believe that it's holistic enough. It's still taking a pill to feel better. Now, it may work for you, but doesn't mean that it's going to work for everybody. The other one are dietary changes. Diet is one of the main reasons why you might feel better, right? Your microbiome eats what you feed it. So if you feed it well, your microbiome will be healthy. If you feed it poorly, your microbiome may not be healthy. I don't feel that either one of those approaches alone is sufficient. Instead, I promote what we have coined our Gut Happy lifestyle, because our Gut Happy lifestyle taps into this much more holistic approach to health. And I'm going to explain how this works in the next couple slides. So our Gut Happy lifestyle is 4 steps. The first is identifying the true problem, which we have now communicated it is not a broken brain, but instead is your gut. Removing the bad, adding the good, and getting support. Now, many approaches out there focus on adding the good. So what can I eat? What could I take? What nutritional supplementation could I take that adds in the good, right? So what probiotics could I take? That fits there. What dietary interventions could I take? That fits there. All of that stuff that I covered in a few slides ago fits here, adding the good. The problem comes in is that we're not just adding the good, but you also want to say, what toxins and exposures are you exposed to in your environment that's causing this dysbiosis, this imbalance of the good and the bad in your gut in the first place? What is causing your unhealthy gut? We call that gut dysbiosis and leaky gut. What is causing this in the first place? And so in a Gut Happy lifestyle, we focus on adding the good, all of that stuff, those dietary interventions, those probiotics, and removing the bad. So many of you tuned in today for this one slide alone. So go ahead, I'll smile as you screen share, because this is the thing that most of you want to know. What could I take that gets rid of my anxiety? And so there's a whole bunch of nutritional supplements out there. And there's not just one. That's the problem. There's all these mind-body approaches, chiropractic. I published a study with the International Chiropractic Pediatric Association a couple years ago on chiropractic's benefits on anxiety for pregnant patients and children. 2 different studies. There's all these mindfulness approaches, CBT. There's all these vitamins, minerals, amino acids, things you could take, herbs. They're all wonderful and great. And if you go on any social media page and ask, what could I take for anxiety? You might get 137 different comments with 137 different ideas of what you could take to approach anxiety. And this is why people burn out. This is why people are like, natural approaches to anxiety don't work, because vitamin D is only going to work if you're deficient in vitamin D. Omega-3s will work if the reason why you're feeling anxious is because you have a deficiency in omega-3s. Some of these things calm anxiety in the moment, like lavender is really great to, I'm feeling anxious, I'm taking some lavender and calming down. It doesn't mean I have a lavender deficiency. Yoga, there's so many different, you know what? If I went to hot yoga, I am not gonna feel anxious for you when I leave. But if I go to yin, I'm gonna feel pretty good, right? There's so much variability here. And this is why this webinar did not start with this slide, even though most of you turned in just for this slide. Because the truth of the matter is, there is not a one-size-fits-all solution to anxiety. The question you should be asking yourself is, what is the root cause for you? Where is your anxiety coming from? And you're not going to know by focusing on simply all of these vitamins and saying, it must be magnesium, it must be vitamin B, it must be lavender, right? You're not going to figure it out that way. Instead, how you're going to figure this out is by looking at your lifestyle. And one of those big things here is identifying the problem, removing the bad, all of that stuff. That was just all adding the good. We could add all the good all we want. But at some point in time, we have to remove the bad. And removing the bad involves toxins. So toxins include all the stuff we normally talk about with toxins, right? Like environmental toxins, personal care products, industrial products, overuse of antibiotics and antimicrobial things and all of that stuff. And if you want to have that conversation, go to Empowered Parents because we have it all the time. That's our Facebook group. But there's another part of toxins that people don't talk about when we talk about anxiety. And that is all this other stuff. Remember we started here and I said, oh, we started with biological, but there's all this other stuff, all of this other stuff. Well, this stuff lies in the toxin category because we have toxic thoughts and thinking patterns that contribute to anxiety. We have toxic people or ineffective communication styles that manifest their way into our anxiety. We have coping styles that just don't work. So if you have a toxic person in your life that you're living with and you just can't communicate with them and you are going into a hole, it does not matter how much magnesium you take, because at some point in time you need to deal with the toxin in front of you. Because in reality, we've got to balance the body through adding the good, all that nutrition, all that dietary support, all that gut health stuff. But we've also got to balance the mind and spirit. Being holistic means doing all of this stuff. We cannot take a pill that will replace body, mind, and spirit. Nutritional supplementation is part of what the work we do, but it's not everything, because you got to be holistic. And so we can't relieve, and they're not just that you have to be holistic, it's that they've got to work together. So if you have unhealthy thought patterns, you might not be able to shake them. It might not do anything. You could lay on someone's couch all day long, but if you have an underlying nutritional deficiency or gut problem, it's not going to go anywhere. You're not going to feel better. But at the same time, if you have these reoccurring traumas or reoccurring problems, thought patterns, things that are getting in your way, it doesn't matter how much of a nutritional supplement you take until you get rid of the toxic stress. They work together. Years ago, I used to do therapy, and I was doing couples therapy at the time, and there was a couple that we broke off into individual therapists, and she was struggling. She could not feel better. What was getting in the way of her relationship was that her thyroid was dysfunctioned. It didn't matter how much talk therapy we did. She needed to get her thyroid in order. And he was a veteran suffering from severe PTSD. It didn't matter what he was taking. He needed to deal with his chronic stress in order to feel better. They needed individual work, and they needed to do this body-mind thing. They needed to be holistic. Because just like you can't vitamin D your way out of a bad diet, you can't talk your way out of an unhealthy gut. They've got to work together. And so overcoming anxiety naturally means being holistic. It means getting to the root cause, and it means asking yourself, what is it in my lifestyle that is toxic? And it may be diet, it may be people, it may be internal thoughts. Where are my toxins lying, and how can I address them? First find the problem, then find the solution. Too often what we're asking on Facebook are for the solutions, and we get 137 comments for solutions. But unless that solution maps onto the problem, you're just picking at all these leaves of the tree without getting to the roots. So it is the top of the hour, which I'm shocked about, by the way. And I obviously covered so much information that many of you are probably spinning in your heads, because I probably covered way too much for a free webinar in one day. And I talk fast, mind you. So I respect that, and I'm sorry for doing too much too fast if I lost you, but I wanted to at least give you a splattering for the first time. I also wanted to talk to you about two things that I have going on as a next step, because if your mind is spinning, you're probably like, I'm ready to change. I want to know, I don't want a one size fits all. I want to change, but I don't know where to start. And that would be very irresponsible of me to not share with you where you could start. So with your permission, I'm going to explain to you two offerings that I have. One is our full-blown program that we are launching, and one is a free program that we are also launching in a couple weeks. So I would like to just really briefly go over them, and if you're interested, we'll have the conversation more. So the Anxiety Answer is the name of our holistic approach program. And we deal with both the internal thinking and the gut. It is a very holistic program. This is sort of the approach we take. So we optimize gut health, and we don't just throw a bunch of supplements at you. That means we hold your hand and we help you with really balancing your gut. We do testing. So if you're not testing, you're guessing. So we do testing. It's all done in consultation with my husband, who's a functional medicine practitioner, and coincides with your individual healthcare practitioner. So we work alongside with whatever you're already doing. This is all support and empowered and guided self-help. So we help you understand your gut so that you could live a gut happy lifestyle. We help you, guide you through a self-help process of unhealthy thinking. What are the thoughts and cognitions that are causing toxic thinking for you, and get rid of those toxins? We help you strengthen your relationships through effective emotional regulation and interpersonal communication strategies. We help you with coping styles. How we cope gets in the way of our relationships. Sometimes how we cope is yelling at our kids. We don't want to yell at our kids anymore. So let's strengthen our coping skills so we could strengthen our relationships. And we do all of this in a supportive environment, because we need friends like us. We need boy mom moms, girl mom moms, mamas who are ready to take on the world through our holistic lifestyle. So we support each other on a weekly, bi-weekly, daily basis. What you get in this Anxiety Answer program is one-on-one support from me and in consultation with my husband. That means we do a complete comprehensive assessment. It takes like a couple hours. Health psychology sessions where we set goals, we reach goals, we make markers. Weekly support, we will be on the phone twice a week, virtually or on the phone, where we do group calls, skills trainings, health coaching, all of that stuff. You get dietary support, lifestyle support, supplementation support. And then there's some additional things like exclusive webinars. When new studies come out, I'm the first there to share them with you. We monitor your progress. We're constantly improving. It is a 6-month program, but the ongoing support lasts beyond that, because this is an intensive program where you will get better with your anxiety. As a bonus, we're throwing in a stool test, which I'll talk about in a moment. The whole program itself for 6 months is $4,997. Like I said, we're throwing in this bonus $600 stool test. That is because it will 100% tell us the state of your microbiome and the state of the imbalance. So we could pinpoint what you need to feel better, what types of supplements you might want to take in collaboration with your individualized practitioner, so that you can optimize your health. Of course, for the first round, we're not charging that full price. As we launch, we're going to do a $2,997 offer. So if you want to be part of the first program, you could do it at that price. And again, if you compare what you would take if you were going to a functional medicine doctor or in individual therapy, that would be much more expensive. So this is an at-home approach to getting to the same results you would get in those mechanisms, but we're not doing those mechanisms, we're doing an at-home supportive approach. Now, because I want to collect more data on this and really share this with more people, if you promise to share your testimony and how it's helped you, for 20 people only, we are doing $400 down and then only $150 a month for 6 months. Then you could stay in the group and you get grandfathered in for as long as you want, really, to help support other people and to continue to, you know, reach out your hand to help other people grow type thing. So it's a killer of a deal. And again, you still get the $600 stool analysis test. So it's actually a ridiculous deal if you consider that you get more than two one-on-one sessions at the beginning and then more after you would talk directly to me twice a week and to each other even more on a daily basis via social media. It is quite the deal. So every time we do something like this, we invite folks in, and inevitably there will be people who miss out and then feel sad. And I always feel bad about that, but I'm warning you, take advantage of this. I already have 3 seats filled, so FYI. If you want to take advantage of this, you could apply by booking a call with me. It's not an intense call. It's just me and you are going to be working together in an intensive way. And so, like, you should like me. So let's call and just get to know each other a little bit, make sure it's a good fit, because I'm clearly not doing this just to make money. I'm doing this because I want to make a better world for my kids. I'm also around for the next hour or so. So if you just want to call me directly, that's my personal number. I got my phone here. You could give me a call. You could text me and just say, I want in, and we'll go from there. Or you can just call me with questions and all of that stuff. If you are not ready for all of this, if you do not want to buy a program, if you don't want that level of intensity, on August 12th, I'm offering a free challenge program. It's called the From Anxious to Awesome 5-day virtual challenge. It's completely free on Facebook. So text me and say you want in to the challenge, and I will send you the invite to that so you could sign up and you could be enrolled in our 5-day virtual challenge, because that will be an at-home approach where each day for 5 days I'll give you some information and a challenge to do, and you could help clean up your lifestyle, remove the toxins, add the good, and feel better, because you do not have to feel yuck. You can live in harmony, and you could kick your way out of anxiety into the joys of peace of mind parenting. So that is all I have for you today, friends. I'm really proud of myself for only going 8 minutes over, because this, in theory, should have been a lot longer. So pat myself on the back for that one, and pat yourself on the back for making it this long, because it's still an hour webinar in the day and age where 10 minutes is probably people's attention spans. So thank you, friends. And I am here for any questions you may have. Find me on social media at facebook.com/Dr. Andrea PhD. Also Treehouse Living's page, which is facebook.com/Treehouse Living, and our group Empowered Parents. Until next time, friends, may your days be full of love and light and anxiety free. Have a wonderful day, y'all.